The military training facility echoed with controlled routine until Sergeant Miller's curiosity reached its breaking point. "Pull up that service record again, Corporal Jenkins," he commanded, doubt clear in his voice. The unremarkable woman in standard fatigues stood quietly near the equipment when the automated personnel system performed one action that changed everything. The effect was immediate. The recruit's rifle clattered to the floor. Senior officers froze at their workstations and faces drained of color throughout the facility. No one had expected the base computer to flag her clearance level. No one had expected the quiet woman with the zero combat record to trigger maximum security protocols. No one had expected the truth. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story captivated you, please consider subscribing. We share powerful stories of unsung heroes every week. The classified training facility hummed with the constant buzz of advanced equipment and muted conversations. Banks of monitors cast blue light across focused faces, illuminating personnel files dotted with red classified markers and yellow security alerts. The air carried the scent of gun oil and electronic circuits, mixed with the tension that came with handling top-secret military operations. It was 1,100 hours on what had begun as a standard morning shift at Fort Bradley Special Operations Training Center, buried beneath the Colorado mountains. Personnel Specialist Second Class Rebecca Chen stood at her assigned processing station, deliberately unremarkable in her standard olive fatigues and regulation equipment. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, no visible identification except for a temporary security badge. Mid-20s, with an observant face that spoke of attention to detail rather than military authority. Her dark eyes moved constantly between personnel files and monitoring systems, while her presence demanded nothing from the intensity around her. To a casual observer, she might have been any clerk, a recent transfer from civilian administration perhaps, or another face in the endless rotation of support personnel. She occasionally made notes on a standard tablet, her typing neat and precise. Unlike the officers and senior staff who filled the facility with their combat ribbons and deployment credentials, she wore no visible markers of advanced training or specialized experience. Just a clerk, it seemed, with basic access and an assignment to verify routine personnel compliance. The training operation underway involved classified preparation of advanced tactical teams for overseas assignments. The operation had proceeded through standard phases: initial screening, skill verification, and now personnel review before final deployment approval. Training Coordinator Williams, a veteran Special Forces operator with something to prove, managed the review protocols with practiced efficiency, moving between workstations and checking status displays throughout the operations floor. The tactical teams had established performance parameters that required careful verification, Williams explained to the facility commander, his voice carrying across the training bay. The decision to proceed with final approval created complications for standard personnel procedures. Sergeant Miller sat rigid at the operations control console, his face a careful mask. A distinguished facility commander with 15 years of classified operations experience, he looked somehow troubled in his fatigues, as if the weight of the classified missions had physically aged him in recent months. Rebecca watched it all, her expression revealing nothing. Only the occasional glance toward the main computer terminals suggested any emotional response to the ongoing procedures. When the facility commander called for a personnel update, heads turned in mild surprise as Rebecca raised her hand slightly from her position at the processing station. Specialist Chun has been conducting final compliance checks, Training Coordinator Williams announced. She may have additional assessment of team readiness. She moved toward the main operations area with a deliberate precision that seemed at odds with her clerk role. Something about her bearing, spine straight, steps measured, attention focused, caught the notice of a grizzled master sergeant seated near the main display. He frowned slightly, studying her with newfound interest. Sergeant Miller, sharp-eyed and methodical, watched her with narrowed attention as she prepared her compliance assessment. The sergeant was known for his no-nonsense approach to operations security and personnel protocols. Today, he wore his authority like a burden, his fatigues crisp despite the morning hour. "Please state your findings for the record," instructed Sergeant Miller. Personnel Specialist Second Class Rebecca Chun, Administrative Compliance Specialist, she replied. Her voice was soft but clear, her professional bearing perfect. Training Coordinator Williams began his questioning, and Rebecca's responses were factual and precise, but delivered in such a measured, quiet tone that Sergeant Miller soon grew visibly impatient. Several times, the operations recorder had to ask her to repeat her statements. Specialist Chun, Sergeant Miller finally interrupted. The entire operations team needs to hear your compliance assessment clearly. Please speak up. Yes, Sergeant, Rebecca responded, barely raising her volume. Training Coordinator Williams continued. Specialist Chun, can you explain your assessment of the team's personnel compliance status? I've been conducting standard verification procedures and monitoring personnel performance according to established administrative protocols, she replied, her voice still frustratingly soft. I've identified several factors that affect deployment certification based on current screening parameters. And what were your findings during verification procedures? I determined that the tactical teams respond normally to standard operational testing. I also noted significant performance patterns that indicate potential security considerations. Did you document these observations? Yes, I logged all team responses and attempted performance analysis through available personnel specifications. Was this analysis reviewed by operations management? It was not forwarded beyond my immediate processing supervisor. The facility security officer, Major Patricia Knox, approached for additional questioning with a skeptical demeanor. Tall and imposing with steel-gray hair that lent her an air of authority, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to challenging questionable compliance assessments. Specialist Chun, what specific military training qualifies you to analyze advanced tactical team security? I completed basic personnel verification during my administrative certification program. And what level of security clearance? Her tone suggested the answer would confirm Chen's limitations. I maintain appropriate clearance levels for personnel specialist contractor work, Rebecca responded evenly. Major Knox smiled thinly. Specialist Chun, how could you possibly understand the complexities of classified tactical operations and security protocols when you've been processing files for only 8 weeks? Something flickered across Sergeant Miller's face. A brief shadow of recognition quickly suppressed. He studied Rebecca more intently now. Objection to characterization, Training Coordinator Williams called out. Specialist Chin's compliance assessments should be evaluated on merit. Sustained, Sergeant Miller replied, his eyes never leaving Rebecca. Major Knox adjusted her approach. Let me rephrase. What specific experience do you have with classified tactical operations in special forces environments? Rebecca paused before answering, her eyes briefly meeting those of the grizzled master sergeant near the main display. My background includes some practical application of personnel compliance analysis, she said carefully. Could you be more specific? That information involves previous assignments that may not be relevant to current processing requirements. Major Knox looked to the facility commander. Sergeant, if the specialist lacks relevant experience with classified operations, her compliance assessments should be considered accordingly. I'll allow the line of questioning, Sergeant Miller ruled. Specialist Chin, please provide more detail about your relevant experience. Rebecca's expression remained neutral. My previous personnel experience involves classified military programs. How convenient, Major Knox remarked dryly. So we're expected to trust your administrative assessments without knowing your actual qualifications to evaluate classified tactical operations? I'm reporting on compliance observations I made using established personnel protocols. As the questioning continued, Rebecca responded with increasingly precise details about tactical procedures, security protocols, and operations procedures that made several senior officers in the facility exchange glances. She referenced specific team configurations, deployment methods, and security measures that seemed beyond the knowledge base of a standard personnel specialist. When shown tactical operations diagrams, her eyes lingered on them a moment longer than necessary, her composure wavering almost imperceptibly before returning to professional detachment. Do you recognize these operational specifications, Specialist Chin? Major Knox asked. Yes, they represent the tactical operations I've been verifying for compliance certification. And your analysis of these specifications proved to be, what exactly? The compliance observations you made about operations security, how does that affect current deployment approval? Rebecca's voice remained steady. The operations analysis I conducted indicated tactical protocols that weren't reflected in current security evaluations. My observations about compliance standards were documented in my processing reports. In the operations facility, the older master sergeant with silver hair and multiple deployment badges watched Rebecca with growing intensity, his brow furrowed in concentration as if trying to place a half-remembered voice from security briefings. The morning hours passed as training coordinator Williams returned for follow-up questions, asking Rebecca about specific compliance requirements for the current operation. Can you explain the standard protocols for certifying a classified tactical operation of this nature? Williams asked. The operations team would have established primary and secondary verification procedures with security oversight, she explained, her voice still frustratingly soft. Standard protocol requires verified performance results and clearance confirmation at predetermined security levels. And if those procedures were insufficient or compromised, the backup verification would proceed using alternative assessment methods after primary compliance was evaluated, utilizing specialized security protocols on confirmed classification operations, she explained with a level of tactical precision that raised eyebrows among the operations staff present. Sergeant Miller leaned forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. Specialist Chen, I've asked you repeatedly to speak up. This operations facility cannot properly evaluate compliance assessments it cannot hear clearly. I apologize, Sergeant, Rebecca replied, her volume barely increasing. The older master sergeant in the facility now sat forward at his monitoring station, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face. Recognition seemed to be dawning slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to something closer to alarm. Major Knox seized on the sergeant's frustration. Perhaps Specialist Chin's reluctance to speak clearly reflects her limited confidence in her own compliance assessments. Training Coordinator Williams stood immediately. Ma'am, that's inappropriate speculation. Noted, Williams, Sergeant Miller replied sharply. Major Knox, confine your remarks to relevant questions for the specialist. Major Knox nodded in acknowledgement. Specialist Chun, in your assessment as a personnel professional, was there anything about the tactical operations that indicated modified security requirements? Rebecca looked directly at the main operations display for the first time. The compliance assessment suggested security modifications beyond current protocol estimates. That wasn't my question. Based on what you observed, should security procedures have been modified? Based on the operational patterns I identified, yes. But my assessment was not included in deployment planning. Major Knox's expression hardened. Are you suggesting that compliance information was deliberately ignored by operations management? I'm stating that the operations analysis I provided differed significantly from the security assessment that was distributed to operations personnel. The operations facility stirred with murmurs. Sergeant Miller tapped his pen once against his desk, restoring order. Specialist Chun, Sergeant Miller said, his voice tight with growing impatience. You'll need to explain that assertion clearly and audibly for the operations staff. What specifically was different about your analysis? Rebecca paused, her eyes scanning the operations facility briefly before returning to the sergeant. When she spoke, her voice remained soft, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear. My operations analysis indicated that the tactical protocols included security features using methods normally reserved for Black Ops operations. That information was not included in the compliance briefing provided to operations personnel. Sergeant Miller's head snapped up, his carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time. The grizzled master sergeant's expression darkened as he studied Rebecca with new intensity. Specialist Chun, Sergeant Miller said firmly, frustration evident in his tone. This is the final time I will ask you to speak louder. The entire operations staff must be able to hear compliance assessments accurately. Rebecca looked directly at Sergeant Miller. A look of quiet recognition passed between them, though the sergeant quickly masked it with professional detachment. The veteran master sergeant in the facility was now gripping his monitoring station, his knuckles white. Sergeant Miller finally interrupted with visible impatience, leaning forward at his operations console. Specialist Chin, we don't have all morning. Speak clearly or we'll proceed with deployment approval without additional personnel input. The operations facility fell silent. For the first time since beginning her assessment, Rebecca looked directly at Sergeant Miller. A look of quiet recognition passed between them, though the sergeant quickly masked it. The grizzled master sergeant near the operations display leaned forward, his hands gripping his monitoring station. Suddenly, the facility's automated personnel system activated, and alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Over the loudspeakers, an electronic voice announced, "Security alert. Clearance code Black 7 Delta detected. Initiating maximum lockdown protocols for Operator Classification Ultra." Every door in the facility sealed automatically, and all personnel froze as they realized the system was responding to Rebecca Chen's presence with the highest possible security classification. The effect was immediate and electric. Sergeant Miller's pen fell from his fingers, clattering loudly on his desk. Several operations staff physically straightened at their workstations as if witnessing something impossible. Major Knox's face drained of color. The grizzled master sergeant near the operations display stood up involuntarily, then slowly sat back down. Complete silence fell over the operations facility as recognition dawned across various faces. Some looked confused, others shocked, and a few, those who understood the significance of what they had just witnessed, appeared stricken. Rebecca continued in her normal soft voice, but now everyone was straining to hear. "That alarm recognizes my clearance code because I was the lead tactical coordinator for the Delta Protocol operations 4 years ago. I was also the primary operations analyst attached to Operation Shadowfall, which Sergeant Miller personally reviewed 3 years before today's training began." She methodically produced a worn, waterproof security case from her fatigues pocket and held it up for the operations staff to see. "This contains classified operational records from Operation Shadowfall, not the sanitized reports filed with military command. These tactical operations aren't just training exercises. They're based on methodology I developed before my operation was terminated and my clearance was officially revoked." Sergeant Miller attempted to call for order, but found his voice failing him. "Specialist Chun, this is highly irregular procedure for personnel assessment. My operations team and I were declared casualties of a security breach during Operation Shadowfall," Rebecca continued calmly. "I was the only survivor. I've spent 3 years working under assumed identity and waiting for another operation to utilize the same methodology, not for personal reasons, but to prevent other operators from being endangered by compromised security protocols." A younger operations technician near the operations terminals looked up in confusion. "This is impossible. Lead Coordinator Chun died in a classified security incident. I processed military casualty reports myself." The grizzled master sergeant turned to address him. "Stay at your station, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "Look at that personnel system response. Automated protocols don't recognize deceased personnel." Rebecca opened her security case to reveal operational blueprints, security clearances, and classified documentation. "My team was eliminated because we discovered General Marcus Stone was facilitating tactical intelligence transfers to hostile forces through a network of compromised military contractors, the same network that provided the false security specifications leading to my team's destruction." The operations facility erupted into controlled chaos. Sergeant Miller tapped his pen repeatedly on his desk, finally restoring some semblance of order. His face had lost all color, and his hand trembled visibly. "This operations facility will pause current operations for 30 minutes, he declared, his voice unsteady. But before anyone could move, Rebecca spoke again. "With respect, Sergeant, this tactical operation contains the same security vulnerabilities that destroyed my team. I've waited 3 years to speak. But current training is proceeding with compromised methodology that could endanger national security." Sergeant Miller slowly leaned back in his chair, his authority visibly shaken. He nodded once, a gesture of reluctant permission. "Operation Shadowfall was classified above top secret," Rebecca continued. "Our mission was to develop tactical operations that could execute without risk of hostile interception. We created operational protocols and security measures that represented the most advanced tactical methodology available. What we discovered was that General Stone was providing our operational specifications to hostile intelligence agencies through a sophisticated espionage operation with tactical records linking directly to enemy governments." She turned her security case and removed an encrypted data chip. "This contains operational blueprints, tactical algorithms, and deployment protocols. We transmitted this evidence before we were compromised. That transmission was intercepted and our operations facility was destroyed. Our team was left to die." Major Knox stood, her voice hollow. I received direct confirmation from General Stone that Shadowfall team had been confirmed Kia. The operation was terminated due to security breach circumstances. We weren't dead, Rebecca said simply. We were very much alive and calling for immediate evacuation. I heard your voice on the command frequency, Major Knox. You sounded confused, but you relayed the termination order. Training Coordinator Williams approached Rebecca cautiously. Lead Coordinator Chun, if what you're saying is true, how did you survive? And why assume a false identity for 3 years? Rebecca's composure never wavered as the facility remained in security lockdown. I survived because I was separated from my team during the final assault on our facility. I was wounded, unconscious, presumed dead along with the others. Military contractors found me and kept me hidden while I recovered. By the time I was functional again, the official story was established. My team was dead, the operation had been compromised, and General Stone had been promoted to advanced operations oversight. She looked around the operations facility, meeting the eyes of several senior staff members. I needed time to gather evidence that couldn't be easily buried again. I needed to understand who knew about the intelligence transfers and who was simply following compromised orders. Most importantly, I needed to make sure no other operators would die because of the same security failures that destroyed my team. The grizzled Master Sergeant approached the central operations area. Sergeant, request permission to address the operations staff. I am Master Sergeant Marcus Webb, retired Special Operations. I was the security liaison for the Shadowfall operation. He turned to face Rebecca. Lead Coordinator Chun was one of the finest tactical architects I ever worked with. If she says her team was betrayed, I believe her without question. Major Knox interjected. This is all highly dramatic, but it has no direct bearing on current operations procedures. Tactical operations development proceeds according to established security protocols, not some conspiracy from years ago. They're connected, Rebecca replied as the security alarms continued around them. The methodology being developed here includes the same security vulnerabilities from Shadowfall that hostile intelligence agencies exploited. Current training is proceeding with compromised specifications. History repeating itself. Different operation, same betrayal, same source. She pulled another document from her security case. This is an operational summary showing that my team reported security vulnerabilities directly to General Stone 6 times before our facility was destroyed. We were told explicitly that questioning security protocols would compromise critical military programs. We weren't being paranoid. We were trying to protect national security. Sergeant Miller studied the document, his operations leadership demeanor cracking further. These security reports weren't included in the operations briefing I received for today's training evaluation. Because they were deliberately removed, Rebecca said, just like current security assessments are being modified to hide ongoing intelligence transfers. And just like the evidence was removed from Operation Shadowfall after my team was eliminated. The operations facility had grown absolutely still despite the continuing security alarms. Every person present was aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the operations technicians had stopped their routine monitoring, staring at Rebecca with undisguised astonishment. Training Coordinator Williams approached the operations console. Sergeant, in light of this new intelligence, I recommend immediate review of tactical operations security and potentially suspending current training pending security assessment. Sergeant Miller nodded absently, his attention still fixed on Rebecca as the facility remained locked down. Granted, all operations procedures will implement enhanced security protocols immediately. He paused, then added, Lead Coordinator Chun will remain under protective custody until these matters are resolved. As staff began coordinating the operational changes, Rebecca spoke again. There's something else you should know, Sergeant. She removed a final document from her security case. This is the original authorization for Operation Shadowfall with your signature from when you served as operations liaison. And this, she produced another paper, is the termination order that condemned my team. The authorizing signatures don't match. Sergeant Miller took both documents with trembling hands. Someone forged my signature on the termination order, he whispered, shock evident in his voice. Yes, Rebecca confirmed. You've been carrying responsibility for a decision you never made. The termination order came directly from General Stone's office. The retired Master Sergeant Webb moved closer. I always questioned why you would terminate that security operation, Miller. It didn't align with anything I knew about your military integrity. Sergeant Miller looked up, visible emotion crossing his face. I've spent 3 years believing I made a call that ended crucial security operations and contributed to my team's death. I authorized the operations liaison, but I never authorized abandoning them to die. The facility communications crackled, and a team of military investigators appeared at the sealed entrance, led by a stern-faced senior agent. What is the meaning of this maximum security alert? The agent demanded through the intercom. Sergeant Miller, I'm Agent Patricia Foster from the Military Criminal Investigative Service. We received an anonymous intelligence package yesterday containing evidence of serious breaches of national security involving General Stone and intelligence transfers. I understand there may be connected evidence being reported in this operations facility. Rebecca smiled faintly as the security lockdown continued. Right on schedule, she murmured. Agent Foster's voice came through the intercom. You would be lead coordinator Chun, formerly of Shadowfall. I would be. We have extensive questions for you, coordinator. Starting with how you survived and why you assumed false identity. And I have answers, Agent Foster. 3 years' worth. The agent's voice continued through the facility communications. Sergeant Miller, with your permission, I'd like to take custody of the evidence lead coordinator Chun has provided and arrange for her protection pending a full investigation. Sergeant Miller nodded toward the intercom. Granted, but I want to be kept fully informed of any evidence relating to current operations security and potential methodology compromise. Of course, Sergeant. It appears several ongoing operations have been compromised by the same source. The operations facility began to clear of non-essential personnel as security protocols allowed, but Major Knox remained at her monitoring station, looking shell-shocked. Rebecca approached her quietly while the facility remained in partial lockdown. I don't understand, Knox said, looking up at her. Why would you risk exposure? I'm the one who relayed the termination order that left your team to die. Because you were another victim of the same security compromise, Rebecca replied simply. You followed what you believed were legitimate orders from a trusted superior. The guilt should rest with those who manipulated you, not those who were deceived. How can you be so certain I wasn't involved? Rebecca allowed herself the smallest of smiles, glancing at the security systems still responding to her presence. Because I've spent 3 years studying every detail of what happened. I know who facilitated the intelligence transfers and why. I know who altered security reports and who profited from the tactical sales. Most importantly, I know you requested confirmation twice because you suspected something was wrong with the termination order. Major Knox's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Those communications were classified. I had help, Rebecca admitted. Not everyone in military operations was compromised. There are still good people within the system who wanted the truth to come out and who wanted to prevent other operators from dying because of security failures. As she prepared to leave with Agent Foster's team, the retired Master Sergeant Webb approached as security protocols began to normalize. Lead coordinator, he said formally, then dropped his voice. Rebecca, we held a memorial service for the Shadowfall team. I spoke about your dedication to protecting national security. I know, she replied quietly. I read the transcript online. Thank you for honoring their sacrifice. What happens to this training operation now? Rebecca looked at the operations displays showing current facility operations. Now it proceeds with honest security assessment and proper vulnerability testing. National security can be protected because someone finally told the truth about intelligence transfers. The operations facility remains suspended in a moment of shocked revelation as security systems gradually returned to normal. Sergeant Miller slowly stood from his operations console and removed his command credentials, setting them on his desk before stepping down to stand on the same level as Rebecca. This facility recognizes lead coordinator Rebecca Chun, presumed killed in action, recipient of the Defense Superior Service Medal, he announced formally, his voice carrying a weight of regret and respect. The retired Master Sergeant Webb approached Rebecca and rendered a respectful acknowledgement. Others throughout the operations facility followed suit, a ripple of silent recognition spreading through the room. Operations personnel who had moments ago regarded her with skepticism now stood in acknowledgement, honoring a fellow operator whose integrity had cost her everything. Major Knox, visibly shaken, stood to address Rebecca directly. I never knew who actually gave that termination order. I've been carrying this responsibility for 3 years, believing I contributed to ending important security work. I know, Rebecca replied. Your voice on the command frequency that day. I heard your confusion. You questioned the order. Twice, Knox confirmed, her voice breaking slightly. They told me I was risking national security by questioning administrative decisions, that the security concerns had been addressed through other channels. Sergeant Miller's professional demeanor cracked as he turned to face the operations staff. I authorized Operation Shadowfall Liaison based on tactical security operations that indicated critical national defense applications. I did not authorize the termination order that ended the operation. The signature was forged. You've been living with responsibility that was never yours to bear, Rebecca confirmed. General Stone used your operations authority to cover her own intelligence transfer activities. Agent Foster's team finally gained entry as security protocols normalized. Sergeant Miller, I'd like to request a formal suspension of current training operations while we secure this evidence and establish proper protocols for what happens next. This has implications for multiple ongoing operations and potentially dozens of personnel. Sergeant Miller nodded. Current operations will continue with enhanced security protocols, but all tactical. Operations training will be immediately reviewed for potential compromise. He paused. Major Knox, in light of the evidence presented, you are relieved of any responsibility for the Shadowfall incident pending complete review of the circumstances. As military investigators began securing the operations facility and escorting people to debriefing areas, Rebecca opened her security case and carefully displayed photographs showing General Stone meeting with known hostile intelligence contacts and military contractors. This was never about recognition, she said softly, addressing the facility at large. It was about preventing other operators from dying because of security compromise, and about making sure national defense serves American interests rather than hostile intelligence agencies. As she descended from the operations area, her shadow stretched long behind her across the facility floor, the shadow of a tactical coordinator standing at attention rather than a personnel specialist checking compliance. For a moment, she paused to look back at the operations displays showing current training operations. The operations staff was coordinating with proper security information for the first time in years. Sergeant Miller was directing operations with restored confidence in his security systems. Major Knox was working to identify other potentially compromised training. Master Sergeant Webb watched her from near the operations console, his face reflecting a complex mix of pride and determination. Rebecca gave him a small nod before continuing toward the exit with Agent Foster's team. Her mission wasn't quite complete. There would be extensive debriefings, military investigations, and probably congressional oversight. The full scope of the intelligence transfers would need to be exposed, and those responsible held accountable at every level. But the most important part was accomplished. The truth was out, and operators could once again trust that their security systems were working to protect national interests rather than serve hostile intelligence agencies. As she reached the operations facility exit, a military marshal approached. Lead Coordinator Chun, Agent Foster has arranged secure transportation for your continued protection. If you'll come this way. She followed the marshal toward the exit, conscious of the eyes following her progress. Operations staff, tactical personnel, security officers. For 3 years, she had lived invisibly, unremarkable and unnoticed, gathering evidence while pretending to be a routine specialist. Now she walked openly, her clearance restored, her purpose fulfilled. The older veteran caught up with her just before she reached the exit corridor. Lead Coordinator, he said quietly. What you did, surviving, maintaining your cover, gathering evidence, coming forward at the right moment, it was extraordinary. I had a duty to my team and to the operators who came after us, she replied simply. It was more than duty, he insisted. It was courage of the highest order, and security work of a quality that protected national interests. Rebecca allowed herself a small smile. You taught us well, Master Sergeant Webb. I taught you procedures and protocols, he corrected. What you demonstrated today, that came from within. He watched her leave with the investigative team, then turned to Sergeant Miller, who had joined them. Some heroes never get the recognition they deserve, he said quietly. They just carry the weight of protecting others. Sergeant Miller nodded, watching Rebecca's figure disappear down the corridor. And some truths are worth waiting years to hear. The morning light continued to strengthen as Rebecca's escort vehicle pulled away from Fort Bradley Special Operations Training Center. Behind her, the operations facility buzzed with renewed purpose as military operations moved forward with proper security protocols and adequate vulnerability assessment procedures. The operations staff worked with restored confidence, knowing their operations would proceed without hostile intelligence interference. Ahead lay the challenge of ensuring complete justice was served and that the full scope of the intelligence transfer network was exposed and dismantled. But for now, in this moment between what was hidden and what would be revealed, the simple act of speaking truth had transformed a routine personnel assessment into something profound. The power of one operator's quiet determination to honor fallen comrades and protect national security, even when it meant sacrificing years of her career to gather the evidence necessary to expose betrayal that powerful forces had tried to maintain forever. As her vehicle reached the main gate, Rebecca's radio crackled with an update from the operations facility. All security protocols have been restored to maximum classification. Investigation proceeding with full military oversight. Rebecca closed her eyes and smiled for the first time in 3 years, knowing that this time, national security would be protected by honest operations rather than compromised by hostile intelligence agencies.